Early in 1863, Northwest Alabama was wedged between two major fronts in the Western Theater. To the southwest, United States forces under Ulysses S. Grant deadlocked in a protracted siege against Vicksburg, Mississippi, and 90 miles northeast of the Shoals, William Stark Rosecrans versus his Confederate opponent Braxton Bragg between Murfreesboro and Tullahoma, Tennessee. At this time, although United States forces did not occupy the Muscle Shoals with permanent troops on the ground, Corinth, Mississippi remained a federal stronghold. Without a consistent federal presence, the Shoals became a gateway, permitting Confederate cavalry to cross from their stronghold in east-central Mississippi into Middle Tennessee and around the flanks of Rosecrans' army. But the Confederates did not necessarily have a free pass. Under command of Grenville Dodge, Corinth was the vanguard outpost, from which point Confederate movements were closely monitored and expeditions and raids were launched into the country to the east. Dodge managed a wide-reaching network of informants and spies deep into Confederate territory who reported on Confederate movements in the region, and with his cavalry scouting and skirmishing around his front, Dodge was proactive in discerning reliable intelligence that was useful far beyond Corinth and the Shoals. Gathering reliable intel was a ubiquitous concern of Civil War commanders, along with gathering sufficient foodstuffs for the men and animals of their commands. At the end of February 1863, Dodge received intelligence that Earl Van Dorn was attempting to cross the Tennessee River at the Muscle Shoals and reinforce Bragg against Rosecrans in Middle Tennessee. He ordered Colonel Cornyn, with all the cavalry in his district, in the direction of Tuscumbia to attack the rear of Van Dorn's column, destroy all means of crossing the river, and find out whether the Confederates had a working locomotive on the railroad between Tuscumbia and Decatur. By this time, Van Dorn was already in Middle Tennessee, but the reconnaissance gained and the supplies gathered made Cornyn's expedition a success in Dodge's eyes. In a letter to his brother, Dodge described the results of the raid into northwest Alabama. Quote, "I have made one of the most successful raids yet, have been out 2 weeks, and am still in Alabama, cutting right and left." End quote. One man Cornyn visited while cutting right and left through North Alabama was Thomas Ligon, a Unionist living near the community of Frankfort. A witness in his Southern Claims petition who saw Cornyn's men take his property was a woman whom Ligon enslaved named Louisa Tompkins. Louisa testified that she was quite certain the property was taken on the 24th of February, 1863, because, she said, quote, "My husband left with the army 3 days after, on its return from Tuscumbia, and I know he left on the 27th. End quote. Her testimony does not recount the emotion of their parting, but the scene must have been heartrending. It was a scene that played out innumerable times. Louisa Tompkins' husband did as thousands of other enslaved people did across the slaveholding South, seized an opportunity for freedom with the soldiers of the United States. On March 3rd, Cornyn returned to Corinth, fully laden with the spoils of northwest Alabama. A newspaper correspondent, whose writing is preserved in Dodge's papers, wrote, perhaps exaggerating, quote, "They took about $1 million worth of property, 60 bales of cotton, 100 head of horses and mules, 108 contrabands, 140 prisoners, 15 yoke of oxen, and about $3,000 in gold. The contrabands say they never saw a Union soldier before. They said there are a large number of Negroes in the country who were very anxious to come within the federal lines." End quote. Already at this time, hundreds of formerly enslaved people were seeking refuge behind federal lines at Corinth. Within a few months' time, some of them would be mustered into infantry regiments. Formerly enslaved people were not the only ones receiving sanctuary in federal lines at Corinth. Unionists living in the hill country of North Alabama were leaving their homes and communities for the protection of the federal forces, and reporting shocking instances of violence directed against them for their political sentiments, or suspected sentiments. Dodge wrote a scathing letter to Philip Roddy on January 17th, quote, "Southern families are fleeing to these lines for protection from these cruelties and depredations, some of whom I find do not sympathize with our cause, but are driven out merely upon suspicion or because some relative has joined this army." End quote. As Dodge alluded to, Alabama Unionists who reached federal lines often enlisted in federal regiments. In addition to joining regiments of northern states, Corinth was the location where the 1st Alabama Cavalry USA was organized from Unionists of North Alabama who had fled political violence in their communities. As the weather warmed in the spring of 1863, the heat of military activity at the Shoals also increased. Cornyn's February 1863 raid was only the first in a series. Tactics had evolved as commanders realized that food, horses, clothing, and cotton were in every way as significant to victory as bullets on the battlefield, and the cornfields and smokehouses of the Tennessee Valley became ground zero in this no-holds-barred type of warfare. A Huntsville Confederate newspaper reported after Cornyn's February raid, quote, "As they subsisted wholly on the country, our loss is enormous. Our farmers say they will not try to make crops in the valley this year unless protection is given them. There are immense quantities of corn in this valley, enough to feed a very large cavalry force all the year round. All the Yankees have to do is come in and get it." End quote.